Welcome to Tech Tuesday number 75. And today we're going to talk about defaults in IP and using ladders and grids to climb away from these defaults. So the term JTBD, job to be done, is often used to say that we're doing something or we're buying a tool. I buy a drill in order to hang up bookcases, but I have a reason for it. So IP is a tool, and it's designed in the sense that we generate a piece of IP for a particular use. And ideally, maybe not, that's not the subject today. If you look at an IP portfolio, each item in the IP portfolio has a job to be done. It has something it's supposed to do. So I have a patent that's meant to block a competitor. Now, this presentation is not about strategy, but is actually about these individual patents. Now, I'm being maybe generous here, but there's so many different options in what you could target with a particular patent, for example, that what people tend to do, if we're lucky, they can do worse, is to do the default. And the default is to broadly protect a critical technology that the client is doing. Okay, that is kind of like the gold standard. If your patent claims an arrow, not good. If it doesn't protect, not good. If it's not critical, oh, well, it's easy to design around. Technology, well, that's what patents are about technology. And usually it's about what people are doing now. And that's not so good because there's a lot more that you can do with IP. And my goal in the talk today is to give some taxonomies, which you can treat as a map. And if you see where this default is located on the map, then you can figure out what alternative things you could do with your patents. So it doesn't have to be broad, it doesn't have to protect, it doesn't have to be critical, it doesn't have to be technology, it doesn't have to be us, and it doesn't have to be in the present, and a lot more. So that's the subject of the talk today. I do want to point out that the answer is it depends. What does that mean? It is not true that a broad patent is always better than a narrow patent. It is not true that a patent which protects is not as good as a patent which provides leverage. It all depends. But if I give you the range of possibilities and reasons, you can decide for yourself what should be done. A few months ago, I gave a talk about a who-what taxonomy, which was actually focused on strategy and spreading out different types of strategies. And when we talk about where the target is located, today I'm going to be a bit more nuanced, and I'd like to point out the following. Default IP is directed at what we're doing, us. Okay, we're making blue widgets. You're going to write a patent about blue widgets. But the patent could be applied anywhere in the ecosystem. So really the first step would be to map out the ecosystem, or at least the value chain that are subject to the whatever it is you're trying to protect. And the point is that when you're trying to control, and that's really what you want to do with IP, you want to provide control, it can be anywhere in the value chain or in the ecosystem. And I have here a few examples. Not too long ago, the whole issue of rare earth metals that China has a monopoly on, a near monopoly, but actually a monopoly only on methods of refining. And still, if they can prevent rare earth metals from getting to the West, and the West can't build computers and airplanes, which is maybe 4 levels above in the value chain. In World War II, the most fun thing to do was to bomb ball bearing factories because nothing works if it doesn't have ball bearings. And right now we have the situation of oil. Okay, oil is not coming out from the Persian Gulf, and the problems everywhere in all value chains, inflation, and so on. So I'm just pointing out that the place where you want to apply pressure in the value chain could be anywhere. And while we're talking about IP usually does not work alone. And even when it does work alone, you usually want to use a contract. Now, most companies are not active in all the levels of the value chain. But even if a company is active, vertically integrated, like perhaps Ford Motors used to be 115 years ago, a competitor can interfere anywhere in any one of these levels. Another point which is interesting, if you have levels, one of the things that your competitor wants to do is take advantage of leakage between the different levels, leakage of value or value extraction. So people who use oil in order to make plastic would like oil to be a commodity and to charge a premium for plastic. And the people that make oil would like to charge a premium for the oil that is used for making plastic. One of the jobs of IP, and this was noted by Professor Wurzer, is that we want to control the leakage between levels. And of course, being IP people, we do it using IP. So here's a few different locations where IP can be located if you think about the value chain. So the obvious location is aimed at us, and that usually means we have IP that prevents exact copying. Some types of IP, for example, freedom to operate documents, actually are for us. Usually when somebody draws a value chain, they draw themselves in the middle. And if it's an ecosystem, even more so. But obviously, you're not really in the middle. Instead of targeting the IP at us, we can target the IP at entities that are in direct contact with us. You notice I have these minus and plus signs. The minus means somebody lower in the value chain, and plus means higher in the value chain. For example, a direct supplier of your company is below you in the value chain, and it might be valuable to have IP on what that supplier does, for example, to prevent that supplier from working with other people. Same thing for your distributor. If your distributor sells your product and the competing product, it definitely tempts customers to buy the competing product. If there's only one distributor, the distributor is tempted to charge a very big, let's call it cut. And these things can be made better using IP. If you have a partner, again, partners are directly in contact with you, you would like to use IP to encourage them to give you money, but also to make sure that there's a fair division of the upside, whatever's the outcome of working together. If you have a customer, you would like them to pay a premium price. If you have a direct competitor, you would like them perhaps to avoid you or to move away, or maybe you'd like to cause damage to them. So these are all one level away up or maybe sideways from you. But you can also be further away than just one level. Remember, I mentioned rare earth metals. So somebody who is a raw material source, you would like them to charge reasonable prices. And If you have the right kind of IP, they will supply the raw material only to you and not to the competitors. And when we talk about raw material, data is an example of raw material. Let's say I have a startup company that identifies coughing based on, I don't know, blood test results, potential for coughing. You know, one of these AI companies that finds correlation between two different things. Well, I'm getting my data from a big data supplier, but I want to make sure that this data is not given to my competitors. Otherwise, my competitors can compete with me. Another one who's far further away than the first level is an indirect competitor. Indirect competitor is not selling a product like yours, but it definitely causes your customer to spend money there and not by you. In this sense, a candy shop and a toy store are both indirect competitors. You want to buy a gift for your grandchild who might have had a birthday, and you can buy them candy, or you can buy them a gift. Any money you spend on one will probably not be spent on the other. Another example is a customer's customer, and the App Store's an example of that. The people paying the money are not the people building apps, but rather the people buying the apps. And more generally, anywhere in the ecosystem, there could be somebody who's getting value because of whatever it is you're doing. And it would be nice to do value capture as well. Some parts of the ecosystem, it's not so much about value, but more about enticement. As a government and standard associations, they sometimes like things to run smoothly. It's good for everybody. And with the right kind of IP, you can be in on it. Now, we're talking, I said, in the middle is us. But because IP is usually used against a competitor or potential partner, it might be better to draw the value chain or the ecosystem with that competitor or potential partner in the middle. And once you do that, it's much easier to figure out what makes them work and how you can interfere or help with whatever it is they're doing. So that was one dimension, which is where. And a second one I call climbing away from R&D. So imagine we have a typical company and we said it makes green widgets, but we don't have to give protection or other IP uses at the level of the green widget. We can go up a level or down a level. First, let's look what happens below the level of what we actually developed. There can be a discovery. There can be data that we're using. There can be problems. We know what problem needs to be solved. There can be an insight. We have an insight that we're using. An insight is not the solution, and sadly, it's not protectable using a patent. But it's definitely a place which might be the critical part. More than once, we've met inventors who said, what's special is I understand what the problem is, or I have a unique insight on how you look at these things, which makes me suitable. Tools, a lot of R&D, manufacturing, there's tools that you need to have. And of course, components like those cute little magnets. The next level is what it is that you actually did. So what did you actually do? You generated know-how, you made an invention, or perhaps you created a technology. The default is to protect the technology you created. Know-how is often ignored, even though without know-how, usually we can't do anything. And if you have an invention, you file a patent on it. And of course, you never know what the invention is until about 5 or 10 years down the line. Until then, you're only guessing. One level up is not the technology, but how the technology is practiced. You can look at the product. Usually, if you have a technology, you build a product that people can use, which makes use of that technology. Why? Most people don't pay you for technology, and in fact, they don't care what's inside your black box. They pay you for solving a problem, service. Sometimes what's actually value is the data that you generate, like CT images. CT machine is a cool machine, but what people really care about is getting those images. A brand is also something you might want to protect, like using trademarks. And that is also a consequence, direct consequence of practicing. If you have a brand and you have some sort of place in other people's minds, let's imagine Coca-Cola, okay, that's a brand, and it wants to occupy the mind of if you're thirsty, it's a cool thing to drink. And if somebody wants to compete with you, they have difficulty competing in exactly that category. And building a category is very expensive and difficult. There's one level higher still, and that's what I call the after party. There's always consequences to whatever it is you're doing. The world changes, and often the value is in the consequences. And if we just flip that around, think about infrastructure. In order to do what you want to do, you need infrastructure to make things work. You need manufacturing and so on. So maybe we can consider that reverse consequences. So I gave you two dimensions already. And if we have two dimensions, what could be better than a two-dimensional chart? And the two-dimensional chart will show us how different we are from the default, which is covering what the invention that we're doing. And I've given other charts in previous presentations, but they don't talk merely about distance. And here's the goal is to say, where can my IP be? So here's a chart, and it has a lot more words on it, so we'll be able to talk about it. If you look at this, I don't know, pinkish purplish color, we're going from underlying the actual thing, the practicing of the thing, and the after parting. And if we look at the blue vertical column, we're looking at the distance of the entity being targeted in the ecosystem. So two away, one away, us, and again, two away, one away. And I gave you just two examples. So the green A is an example of a patent on a competitor's product. Okay, so you have a technology, but we filed a patent and not on yourself, but on a competitor who's one step away. And we filed the patent not on the technology the competitor is using, but on the actual product they're making. The red B is the opposite. We're filing a patent on a tool, okay, it's in the underlying place, that a supplier needs. Now, I'm not telling you that all of your patents should be everywhere. What I am telling you is when you look at this 2D chart, you can figure out how diverse you are in the type of IP that you're using and whether you've been limiting yourself to one small part of this area for no good reason. So let's talk about patents for a second. We filed a patent, let's say A or B, and the question we always ask when we file a patent is what exactly do we want the claims to cover? So here in ascending interest, perhaps, sometimes we file on what we actually do. We have a resistor and we have a transistor and a capacitor and maybe a little coil and so on. Sometimes we file patents on what is cool, okay? We've all seen very cool inventions, elegant solutions, you file a patent on it. I'm not telling you if it has any value, but that's why we're filing. It's actually quite common. The next step up, and I'm emphasizing again that it's not necessarily better, it's just up in the way I'm describing the dimension, is when you file a patent and you focus the claims on how you create value. Let's say treating cancer. Treating cancer is a very big value. So we're going to write a claim about how we treat cancer. That makes sense. I call it value creation, but often patents are valuable because they can destroy value for somebody else, and you can use them for threatening. Often value creation is a particular feature that solves the problem that the customer has. And now there's one level above that, which is value extraction. It's nice that you're curing cancer patients, but who's going to pay you? So we can talk about having a patent, so we're the only ones who can make that cure. But we'd also like a way to get the money that is commensurate with the value we're actually providing to that cancer patient or to the medical system. The value is usually money, but sometimes it's power. And the classic way of doing it, not the only one, not the best one, is covering a disposable component. Okay? How do we get money in cancer medication? We have a pill. Okay? So we're protecting the pill. People buy the pill, sell the pill, and that's what we have. We can go another higher level, which is leverage. Imagine that we have a patent that in order to avoid it, the competitor needs to raise the price of his product. What will happen is that people will buy more of our products. Okay? So we're leveraging the patent, and that's what we're filing the patent on. It's not on what we're doing, but on that particular part of what the competitor is doing, which will force the competitor to charge more and leave us off the market. One level above leverage is when we talk about the future. In particular, the ability to create alternatives. So there's a version 1 of the product, and we have IP on version 2 of the product. One level above that is a positioning of the company. So a true story, I mean, half of it's true. A true company, just old brands pivoted to become a data center company. Let's say the company knows ahead of time it might need to do that, and they file IP, which enables them to pivot to data center cooling, which is not exactly what they're doing. Okay, so that IP allows you to position the company when the time comes where it has more value. One more level above that is IP that's directed to shape the world. Okay, so let's talk about the USB-C, the new USB, I'll call it. If you're an Apple person, you used to have all of these special unique plugs that only Apple had. And if you had both Apple and Android, you had to have lots of cables. The European Union decided that it's not good to have so many cables, it's bad for the environment. And there's a standard for USB-C, and it was enough to force Apple to change their plug design. Okay, I can't tell you if this change in the world is important or valuable, but IP on the USB-C standard is valuable. So I mentioned value creation and value extraction. How do we use that together with this chart that I just showed you? Let's say in our hypothetical world, the blue circle is where value is created, and the orange circle is where value is extracted. I'm sure you noticed that the IP, these A and B, are not at all aligned, not with where value is created and not where value is extracted. It could be good, it could be bad, but the important point of this chart is that you're able to show the relationship between your IP and the type of support you want to provide as a business model of the company. Okay, because value creation is an important part of the business model, and value extraction is an even more important part. So it could be that these patents give wonderful support to these functions, but at least we can talk about it. If we look at the third measure I gave, we can do a different two-dimensional chart. And here, the blue circles are where we have IP, and we're just looking at the location of the IP with regard to position, I'll call it, in the ecosystem, and the type of application that the IP does. For example, covers the future, covers value creation, or is just cool stuff. Anybody familiar with system uh, speak, system analysis and so on, is probably familiar with the term node and link or stock and flow. That's different ways of looking at a system. And the word ecosystem has system inside of it. So you can consider the ecosystem to be a network of nodes and links. And now, where can the IP be applied there? And again, we're talking about identifying that there's a lot of different possibilities. So let's talk about targeting a node. A node could be a particular competitor or a particular thing, how the competitor generates income. A link could be how the competitor affects the customer price anchor. Okay, if my competitor is selling blue widgets for $10 a piece, it's not so easy to sell green widgets for $100 a piece. If we prevent the competitor from selling blue widgets, then that's very good. The link itself has something flowing on it. Could be information, could be power. Maybe we can block it using IP. Very interesting is interfaces where a node is coupled to another link. For example, I have a competitor. How do they receive usage information from one of their customers? Target that. There's something called pinch point, which you're going to see in the next slide. But the point is that there are critical places like the Straits of Hormuz, and those places are the best places perhaps to put IP. Maybe what we're looking at is not the ecosystem itself, but some force that is applying to it. People are expecting increase in quality. Or maybe we want to target a buffer that a competitor uses. Okay, if they have a buffer, they can undercharge for a while until we go bankrupt. And last but not least, relationships. IP is used to create relationships. It's used to control relationships. So let's identify which relationships we want to create or control. In perhaps a more general way, there's a famous paper by Donella Meadows, and the paper is called Leverage Points, Places to Intervene in a System. And some of these leverage points, like if you look over here, we mentioned like sizes of buffers, perhaps mindset we've talked about in the past. The point is that as you go down the list from 12 down to 1, Donella believed, she passed away, that the effectiveness of intervening in the system, in the ecosystem, goes up. And some ways of designing an IP strategy, each IP item is aligned with one of these points of leverage. Okay, this IP changes the gain on positive feedback loops. And this IP provides punishment, which changes the rules of the system. Now, you can agree with that or not, and maybe I'll give a different talk just on that subject. And by the way, I do not agree with Meadows on other subjects as well, but she's famous about this list in particular. Usually you apply more than one IP. You have an IP portfolio. So what you really have is a pattern of IP. And if you saw before, I showed you charts with multiple IPs. And that really means that you can plan a pattern and you can see a pattern. And that could be interesting. What is the pattern of IP and what is it doing? I don't know, about half a year ago, I showed this chart. This chart is less abstract way of looking at where. I've showed you where just about distance compared to level relative to technology. Here, we actually have the components talking to each other. And for each component, we have some sort of IP item, and it's really not important what they are. Okay, so this is a different chart showing where the IP is active. Here's IP that is active on the getting bored function, and here's IP that blocks somebody from saying you're infringing. And I just wanted to put this in order to show the contrast with the more abstract views of where. Okay, so done all of that. And I'll get back to the original words that I said, broad. Do we have a broad patent or narrow patent? So usually we choose between broad patents and narrow, specific and general, critical features and not. And what I want to do is not use these words as words to give a score, but to understand that they define different dimensions. So imagine I'm writing a patent on an automobile. So here is a broad and general claim that covers a critical feature, a vehicle that has four wheels and an engine. Okay, that's broad. It's critical because if you don't have an engine or don't have wheels, it's not what we consider today to be a car. We could write a narrow claim, diesel engine and pneumatic wheels. We could also claim only a component. Okay, in this case, steel radial inflatable rubber tires. Still a critical component in a modern car. Or we can claim less critical components like adjustable seats. Or we can claim features that you can just avoid having altogether. Entertainment system. And the point I'm trying to make is not that one of these is better than the other. It's not a question of style that you like entertainment systems. And it's not a question of negligence that you decided to cover a less critical component. And there's also no correct general guidelines to what you need to do. It all depends. Question is, now that we've defined this dimension and we understand how it goes, which IP item will have the effect that we want to have? If our goal is to compete in the market of high-end automobiles, entertainment systems are not avoidable. So we're using a patent in order to carve out our niche. Talks about IP. Ooh, it's supposed to be red. And if I have IP in a particular location on the grid, it's not doing the same thing as a different type of IP at the same location. So I'm just putting this out there. Here's different types of IP, patents, trade secrets, know-how, copyright, freedom to operate. each one of them does something else. So we not only need to choose where we are, but also what type of tool we're going to use. The tool called may not. There's a tool called cannot. The tool called friction. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to turn this into a nice 1 or 2 dimensional space, but perhaps in the future. Fine, I have IP. And let's talk, for example, about patents, but it's just as relevant for other IPs. And the question is this hard power or soft power? For example, I could use IP to block a competitor. So that's the default, remember that word, for patents, designs, and trademarks. Usually people file a patent, design, and trademark by default in order to block somebody. But sometimes the power that the IP applies is the power of creation. I'm using an IP to create a market or to make something more tangible. So SCP patents are a good example of that. Sometimes the IP is applying psychological power, like positive, it's enticing investors, or negative, it's scaring away competitors. Sometimes the power is the power of perception. Somebody sees we have 50 patents on a certain technology, they get the perception that we actually have a lot of technology, not just that we have patents. Sometimes what we're doing is controlling the rules and the habits. And the classic example in my mind is VisiCalc. VisiCalc was a spreadsheet, the first spreadsheet, and it was very difficult to learn how to use it because people didn't have, graphical interfaces and so on. You did everything using keyboard shortcuts, Control Shift 7 or E or something like that. And it meant that if somebody moved from one company to a different company, and the first company was using VisiCalc and the other one was using CopyCalc, you didn't want to retrain these workers. So you used the same shortcuts. And your user manual had a list of the shortcuts, which guess what, was infringing the copyright of VisiCalc. Okay, so the power was simply switching costs. Now, there's a lot of diversity on how you apply IP. Is IP usually active or passive? Well, a lot of people measure IP based on whether it's infringed. So that's active and not just IP waiting to be used. How linear it is, whether it's direct or indirect. Direct means you have contracts. I'm sorry, indirect means you have contracts, and direct means you don't have. And in a startup company that wants a monopoly, usually you don't have contracts. It's direct, either somebody's infringing or not. Sometimes the power is, I'll do it because I can sue you. And sometimes it's what the Chinese call a borrowed knife, meaning somebody else will do the work for you. Sometimes IP is applied quickly. Litigation in this sense is fast. But sometimes the IP is there just in order to block, version 2.0. Some IP is applied in a way that's reliable. Okay, if I license a Mickey Mouse trademark and design on my pajamas, it will work 90% of the time, but a lot of patents will not. Can't not talk about IP business needs. Usually the goal is not in one of these charts that I gave you, but actual needs. And some of the more common needs, even more than value extraction, are things like revenue. We want people to pay us. Valuation, we want people to buy our company. Manufacturing cost, we want to be able to manufacture cheaply. So when we talk about aligning the IP portfolio with the business needs, what we're really saying is we want to be able to show how the patents do all of these different things. And if you look at a patent which directly protects money, revenue, that is probably a more powerful patent than one that only does it indirectly. An IP that avoids risk, like freedom to operate, or IP which encourages partners or prevents them from going to the competitor, that can affect my valuation. So I built a chart, okay? And this chart has two dimensions. The vertical blue dimension is money coming in and going out. And obviously money coming in is good and money going out is bad, especially if the ratio between how much is going out and what value you're getting is not a good ratio. And the horizontal pink-purple dimension is valuation. Is it making your valuation go up or making your valuation go down? Okay, we'd love all of our relationships to be in the upper right corner. Valuation goes up and we get paid money. Reality is that if you have a supplier, you got to give them money. If you have a competitor, not only do they reduce the money, the price you can charge, but they also reduce your valuation because you're not a monopoly anymore. And I'm showing here very schematically that these orange bars, whose sole goal is to show where you're going to use IP in order to prevent the current state from changing to being a worse state. The movements can, of course, be happening on their own, or you can be using IP to encourage them. But we're using bars in order to stop our partner from lowering our valuation, in order to stop a supplier from increasing cost. That's why the blue arrow is going down, or becoming a competition, which is why it's moving less. Coming to a close, I'd like to point out that there are a lot of other default things that people say about patents, which should be taken not with a grain of salt, but as an opportunity to think about what you could actually do. Let's say we have IP, which it's difficult to litigate it. You're not going to win in court. People will say that's not valuable. But actually, for some types of licensing, that IP is valuable because perhaps your licensees want to know that you're not likely to sue them. It makes them easier to sign deals. Invisible infringement. Usually it's considered to be bad. Deep pockets. If there's no single large infringer to sue, it's usually considered to be bad. But again, each one of these default limitations on what you should be doing with your IP has counterexamples. Here's ladders I didn't put in. Okay. What are you protecting? Anchoring ladder. Usually there's something that can't change, like in medical situation, physiology can't change and reimbursement changes slowly. And the question is always, is my IP on that anchor or further away? To summarize what you should do when you wake up tomorrow morning, you want to avoid doing the default by default. It's okay to do the default, but don't do it by default. So first you should be aware of what default you have and what are the reasons for the default. Then, of course, you should obviously look at your business needs, the ecosystem, and possible futures to understand what you need. Then you can use these taxonomies and charts that I gave you, or other ones, I have links or whatever it is you want to invent, in order to help you generate a range of different possibilities of what the IP could be doing. Then you evaluate it, you build a strategy, and so on. Another thing you can do with all of these cool charts is, given an IP portfolio or an IP strategy, you can use these charts to evaluate it, to give a quick picture of Is it a good portfolio or a bad portfolio? What weaknesses does it have? So IP has a default setting, like the sun, sorry. And the default setting avoids a lot of the potential of IP. There are a lot of different dimensions, so I gave you some. And most important, we already know that IP is about other people. So you already know that covering exactly what you're doing is probably not interesting. On the other hand, IP is usually, valuably, about the business model, which means value extraction and money flow. So you should have IP directed exactly at your business model. Take this example of a cat paw company. We can have a situation where cat paw sells mechanical mice, and maybe another company is going to offer the same kind of service cat paw is doing, but with a different technology. So we have to plan what IP we should have. And we already know that it's not going to be only IP on what cat's paw is doing. Okay, I am stopping the recording.